It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Big day tomorrow. Joe Biden going to be in Pittsburgh unfurling the big infrastructure plan. Yes, the Build Back Better plan. Going to get some details, going to get some direction, where he's thinking, what's on the agenda. Early indications, it's more than just roads and bridges and waterways and broadband. There's talk. It's going to be about people too. It's going to be about workers. It's going to be about families. It's going to be about us. And, this is fantastic. I mean, as it's been framed as our infrastructure is more than just the physical things. It's the human things as well. And I think that's really important because for way too long, workers have been viewed as just, negatives on a balance sheet, things that can be used and discarded. Instead of having policy, and this goes back to conversations that we've had on the program for years about what's an economy for? Why do we even have an economy? Ultimately, what's the goal of the economic activity that's going on? Is it to make rich people more money, or is it to create an environment where people can live, support their families, and thrive? Which is it? Now, the capitalists will tell you it's all about the bottom line, about profit, about more for me. And I'll tell you, as a union guy, it's about getting some value and getting some reward for our work. I go back to an old Romanian guy I knew years and years ago. He said, in his country, and he was in my country, you live to work. You get up every day and you live to work. That's all you do. You work, and then you die. He goes, I come to America, where I work to live. And it was that mindset that brought him here. The idea that your labor could be fairly compensated and that you could have a better standard of living, a better work-life balance, a better existence in your time on this planet. Not just about feeding the corporate master or the ownership class or whoever is at the top. And sadly, the last 40 years, we've moved towards that model. People working 2-3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head, just food on the table for the kids. I'm thrilled that Joe Biden has taken this approach. It's just not about the physical infrastructure that we can make more profit off of, but it's about actual people. And that is a good thing. First wave, I guess, going to be rolled out in Pittsburgh. The Build Back Better economic agenda is what they're calling it. I guess this first wave somewhere, there was talk 3 to 4 trillion overall. I'm guessing this first wave that they're talking about 2.25 trillion, it's being reported. About 650 billion of that's going to go towards, your water systems, your transit systems, your highways, your roads, bridges, that kind of stuff. All of that. They're talking about another $400 billion to be used to care for the elderly and people with disabilities, especially coming out of this pandemic. As people were infected, now they're going to have lifelong ailments. And some people aren't going to be able to do, what they were able to. This is a start. Also looking at $300 billion for affordable housing and about $300 billion to revive our manufacturing base that desperately needs it. Again, going back to that, what good is an economy if workers aren't sharing in its fruits? And if there aren't jobs where people can make good family-sustaining wages, like you can in manufacturing, you're just feeding Jeff Bezos, who, as we speak, is doing everything he can possibly do to suppress workers from joining and forming a union. They're doing everything they can do in their Scorched Earth campaign to crush the organizing that's going on down there. Counting the votes soon. I'm hoping we hear a result, and I'm hoping for a positive result at that. They're also talking about $180 billion in research and development money. Bring back the manufacturing, bring back the smart people who figure this stuff out, the tinkers in their garages, that innovation that our country's been known for decades. revive that with a little boost. I think it's a good idea. Also, they're going to throw some money at, and much needed money at our water infrastructure, about $100 billion. Because, we would like, I think, at least most of us would like clean drinking water. I don't think we want, brown water coming out of our taps all the time, with chunks and stuff in it. That's not good. Especially in, places like Flint or, Allentown or our industrial Rust Belt that had been allowed to pollute at will, and nobody held responsible. Now we're going to go back and clean some of that mess up. High-speed broadband, which, someone who lives in a rural community like I do, I'm all in favor of it. Because understand, the only reason a lot of rural communities got electricity was because Truman, and I think it was 47, 48, the Electrification Act that made sure we got power lines across the nation and into rural communities. It'd be great to do kind of an Electrification Act, like a broadband act, to make sure that we get decent. I'm not even asking for good. I'm asking for decent internet speeds in rural communities. We're not going to get anywhere like Singapore or South Korea. We're not going to touch that. Those are pipe dreams. But somewhere, competitive, somewhere close. Just a thought. Also going to spend some money on workforce development. People need skills. People need training. We need to do some of that. And I'm a big fan of apprenticeship programs. I think spending money in getting people to learn how to build our roads and bridges and our broadband and, the solar panels and the windmills and all of the things that we need, good step in the right direction. What I'm reading, what I'm finding out, this isn't the final. We'll find out, where the game is. But all in all, so far, not bad. Now, Bernie Sanders is saying, hey, look, you're talking about the physical part? Good. The human part? Good. How about we do something to help older workers as they're getting older? He wants to drop Medicare age down to 60 from 65. Great idea. Would love to see it down to 55 because I got to work another year. Because look, and I say this seriously, there are a lot of jobs that would open up if you had the ability to retire at 55 and support yourself. The healthcare component of it, people can live on the income that they have. I think a lot of people could, or take part-time jobs here or there, do something that they really want to do, like focus on like this, for instance. But the healthcare part of it is just, it's insurmountable for most people. So dropping that down, giving people the opportunity to go follow their passions. Again, back to the, to my Romanian friend. We don't work to live. The idea is that we don't live to work. We work to live. And that's where, the thought is. He also wants to, Sanders wants to throw in the idea of getting seniors dental care, eyeglasses, hearing aids, things like that to help them make their quality of life better. I know it's hard to believe. A little bit better quality of living. Now, this is not going to be easy by any stretch. It's going to take a good sales job. We'll see what Biden does in his speech there in Pittsburgh. But, you're going to have a real hard time selling the part of it that is going to pay for it. It's great. They're great investments, and I'm all in favor of all of them. We have so much that needs to be done. Go. I mean, that's my mindset. There's so much to do. Go. Something. Do something, because it's still better than what we've been doing. Now, there are a number of Democrats saying we need to do all these other things. This is infrastructure. We need to get people jobs. We need to get people the skills that they need, and we need to rebuild this. Going to be a tough sell. Going to be a little bit tough sell because the tax part of it. The tax part of it is pretty simple. Biden wants to raise taxes on the very wealthy. He wants to go after raising the corporate tax rate. You remember the Trump tax cuts lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% all the way down to 21%. Major welfare for corporate America. They got off the hook. And look, they didn't do away with any of the loopholes. So it's not like they were paying an awful lot of taxes before, because even at 35%, the average corporate tax rate was somewhere around 14-15%, which is right in line with the rest of the world because we give lots of sweeteners. This is way down way down from 1953. I know we love to think back, oh, how wonderful it was, the golden era of America, the Norman Rockwell paintings, Leave It to Beaver, all that stuff. Corporate tax rate 1953, 56%. And you know what happened? We had corporations. They did stuff. They provide products. They provided good jobs, good union jobs where workers were going, hey, we want some of the wealth that our labor is creating. Thank you very much. And they were paying higher taxes. Now, nobody was paying 56%, but they were paying a lot higher than 21 and much, much higher than 14, 15. And what did we do with that money? Oh, yeah, we built an infrastructure. 1956, you had Truman built, the highway system. We funded education so kids didn't have to go into a lifetime of debt to get an education. We funded a lot of stuff with that money. We didn't have got to have skin in the game. If you want an education, son, you're going to have to get skin in the game, which means that you're going to take on a massive amount of debt that you're probably not going to pay off for decades, and that the bankers are going to line their pockets. That's the wrong direction. And for me, this is a moment, and I've been thinking about this. This is a moment where we can undo, seriously, we can undo 40 years of supply side voodoo Reaganomics. We can undo, 40 years of corporate Democrats and their neoliberalism. We can undo all of the bad ideas that corporate America gave to both parties to screw the working people. This is an opportunity, and thank goodness Joe Biden's doing it. Problem is how you can get these corporate Democrats to come along, because there's already some squawking. Because look, they're going to have to raise taxes. It's going to have to happen. Corporate America is going to have to put some money into it. Are very wealthy, who've done really, really well, especially during this pandemic, gonna have to chuck in a little bit more as well. They're talking about for people making over $400,000 a year, going back to the pre-Trump tax rate of 39.6%. Again, let's do the Wayback Machine thing. 1953, way back then, top marginal tax rate on those folks. Sit down. I hope you're sitting, or keep both hands on the wheel. 92%. So they're whining, complaining. Oh my God, 39.6%. Which again, they got tons of loopholes to get out of. Sky is falling. So the idea, raise the corporate tax rate. We're going to bring in, they're estimating somewhere around $730 billion over the next 10 years. Good start. Imposing a global minimum tax on profits from foreign subsidiaries. It's going to bring in $550 billion. You want to do business in this country, you got to pay taxes in this country. Capital gains that they're talking about, and I love this part, but saying we should be doing this for years. The fact that people are gambling on Wall Street and our big investor class, the David Teppers of the world who made $4 billion in 1 year. They should have to pay at the same tax rate if it was earned income that anybody who was swinging a hammer would have to pay, instead of the lower capital gains rate. They're saying that alone, that one change, could bring in about $370 billion. That good stuff. Now, again, as I've been saying, the concern, corporate Democrats, because, corporations, Donald Trump was right. The last guy was right. When he gave out money, he gave it to everybody, because you buy both sides. You always do. They're going to start complaining about their parts of it. Can't raise taxes too high. Can't do it on the poor, rich people. And one of the dividing points, and this is one of those moments for me where I go, the person who comes out and says we have to get the salts back, is to me is a corporate Democrat. And for those who don't know, the SALT is the state and local taxes. One of the things that Trump had done is they cut off, and this was an attack on blue states, on wealthy donors in blue states, that I'm not horribly against. Anything over $10,000 in property taxes, you can't deduct off your federal taxes. I'm actually in favor of that, because if you're in an area and you have a home that they tax it that high, you probably have a giant home. Now, we can do things a little differently and tie that to, some kind of income number. We can tie that in a way that if you were fortunate enough that, you're a union plumber in New York City and you make a good living and you've been in that house for, 20 years and the property values have gone up and your taxes have gone up, that they don't become so onerous that they're crushing you. We can talk about that and figure out how we fix that. But someone making $4 billion a year, living in a 20,000 square foot mansion, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be able to deduct that. I'm sorry, that should not even be close. Now, of course, Republicans are not going to raise taxes, so you cannot expect them to get involved in this at all. They've all taken Grover Norquist's no anti-tax pledge. And look, they're just never going to raise taxes. Their fetish is the tax cut. That's what keeps them up at night. Gives them a warm, fuzzy feeling in the morning. They're going to use, and get ready for it, they're going to use, we can't raise taxes during a pandemic. It's so bad. We'd love to. We'd really love to help you. We'd love to help you pay for those infrastructure things. We'd love to help you get those jobs that people are going to need. But, just not the right time to raise taxes. Understand, the Republican Party, there's never a right time to raise taxes on the wealthy. And I've been saying for a while, we need to realign our tax code to pre-Reagan, where the very wealthy paid a much larger share. Again, the bigger your shoulders, the more water you should have to carry back to the cave. And I know people say, well, you're punishing the wealthy for being successful. No, I'm not punishing them for being successful. I'm ensuring that we have the resources that we need so that they can continue to be successful. If we end up in a situation where we have a handful of gazillionaires as we're heading down and a desperation class of workers, well, there are countries that do this. Think Brazil. And I don't know that we want to emulate that. We want to invest in our society. We want to invest in our infrastructure, in our kids' future. There's so much we should be doing. And I'll tell you, I'm thrilled that Joe Biden is moving in this direction and undoing some of the damage that have been done by corporate Democrats and Republicans. I'm anxious to see the speech and see what is being rolled out, because I think it can be a really good thing for working people. Love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1870. That was the day the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was adopted. It was the third Reconstruction Amendments. It prohibited voting restrictions on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Premier historian Eric Foner states that the Reconstruction Amendments reflected, quote, a newly empowered national state and the idea of a national citizenry enjoying equality before the law. These legal changes also arose from the militant demands for equal rights from former slaves themselves. The bulk of southern states refused to ratify, but then capitulated. Interestingly, New York sought and failed to revoke its earlier ratification. The amendment split the women's suffrage movement for its failure to codify women's voting rights. Some radical Republicans also abstained on the basis that it did not also prohibit poll taxes and literacy tests. Immediately, the 15th Amendment came under attack. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black voters and Reconstruction governments for years. One of the most extreme examples was the 1873 Colfax Massacre. After the Compromise of 1877, President Rutherford B. Hayes refused to enforce civil rights protections. The rise of discriminatory Jim Crow laws effectively disenfranchised Southern blacks for nearly a century. Congress would finally enforce the 15th Amendment fully through the Landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, the act has come under attack most recently, as in the 2013 case Shelby versus Holder. Jurisdictions with histories of voter restrictions no longer have to obtain pre-clearance before implementing changes to voting laws and practices. Over 150 years after the end of the Civil War, African Americans are still fighting to protect their right to vote. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the Biden administration today allowed media in the tents down on the Mexican border, the Texas-Mexico border. And look, I said they should have done this day one. So this is a good decision in my view. They should have done it day one to show just how bad things were and how bad Trump had bungled things and what they were left with. Day one, this is what it should have been. And then maybe we would have been saved from whatever the heck that little mockumentary or jungle tour that Ted Cruz took us on, talking about infant babies. And you go, what is it about these people and infant babies? Is that like the trigger word to get you to then care? If we would have said infant babies 4 years ago, would Ted Cruz have actually given a, you know what? And the answer is no. And here to share some thoughts on, well, the Ted Cruz, I've asked Rick Levy to come talk with us. Rick is the president of the Texas Afl Cio. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, it's awesome. I love being on your show, Rick. Thanks for having us.
So, I'm sure you saw the whatever that was at midnight on the Texas border, going into the jungle, braving the.
Yeah. I don't know how to describe it other than I think Beto O'Rourke described it pretty well, trying to cosplay a border patrol agent or something. It was, my question is, how does the man do this without just totally laughing and keeping a straight face? He has pushed the bounds of any conceivable self-respect, I think, with how he's acting. And for him, okay, just to be really clear, we're talking about hypocrisy in Ted Cruz, so there's it's fertile territory.
Right.
But for him, after what we've been through the last 4 years on the border with Donald Trump, to show this feigned outrage now at how people are being treated when he didn't say a goddamn thing during 4 years of time, and in fact defended the Trump administration's completely inhumane treatment of people coming here to seek a better life. I would love to be a fly on the wall when he talks to himself about what he's going to do, because I would love to see how he makes it all work in his head.
Well, not only is he despicable, he's soulless. And that's the problem. This is someone who, it's all about the game of politics, and it's not about solving problems.
It's not about the game of politics. It's about the game of Ted Cruz self-aggrandizement. There's not even a consistent political thing other than his own positioning to meet his own delusions of grandeur. It's completely soulless. That's a great word, and it's just watching him makes your stomach crawl.
But I look at this, and we talked about this yesterday a little bit. The fact that they're rewriting what the history has been. You had Donald Trump coming out and saying that all the people who invaded our capital, all the insurrectionists, all those folks who who wanted to destroy our democracy, that they were they're being persecuted, that they were friendly. They were hugging the police. They had great relationships with the police. Yeah, by stabbing them with the flag and beating them with a fire extinguisher. Great relationships. And you got this with Ted Cruz. It's all Joe Biden's fault. Never had this problem before. It's this revisionist history. It's this they think we're stupid, and some of them, I guess, are.
Well, I don't know if people are stupid as much as they just never hear anything different. And when you spend time in that bubble, that becomes your reality. That's why it's so difficult to penetrate and actually have a conversation with somebody who, if all you get is that information that it was Antifa that stormed the Capitol, then and you don't get any other source of information, what do you think? Look, we went to the border. We did a border solidarity delegation to El Paso. And when people were being excluded and people were living literally in cardboard boxes lined up on the other side of the border, when he completely shut down political refugees from even being able to enter the country to get asylum. And we talked to the folks and we talked to the workers, and we saw the immense human suffering that was caused by this ideological racist approach to immigration that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz championed. And it was heartbreaking. We saw, Rick, we saw veterans of this country who had been deported by this previous administration. And I didn't hear peep one out of Ted Cruz. And so I guess I would like to know. I mean, we kind of know what he is here in Texas. Do people where y'all are at, do they like think that he's serious? I mean, do people like does it make sense to you?
No, it doesn't make sense. But here's the thing. Ted Cruz wasn't alone. There were 18
No.
senators that were down in that border who were acting like they were Magellan discovering new territory.
Right.
That, oh my God, this is such an atrocity. Oh my gosh, who knew? Well, this is
Right.
not new. This is 40 years in the making. And you in Congress, all 18 of you are now pretending like, hey, we found something. You're the
Right.
ones who fell down the job because you're the ones who are supposed to fix this. It's the fact that we don't have legislation. We don't have rules to do this right.
They don't have any desire to fix it. They have a desire to campaign about it. And I'm sick of it, really sick of it.
Yeah, I love this revisionist history stuff, though. It's crazy. But here's the other part of this. And I have friends everyone's got their opinion on what should happen on the border. I've got friends who think you swing the doors wide open, let everybody come in. I've got people who say no, we need giant 1,800 feet walls and barbed wire and all. And then every thought in between. This is where Congress had better figure this out. Or we're going to continue to have these crises over and over again, and it's going to be people who suffer on both sides of the border.
You just laid that out, Rick, and it's really interesting. For a long time, people did not see immigration as an issue that labor needed to be involved in, and particularly in Texas. Back in the 80s and 90s, there were broad sectors of the labor movement that felt like our immigration policy ought to be, call immigration when you see somebody working that you think might not have papers. And that has changed so dramatically. And it's just because of situations like where you just talked about. It is used as a wedge. It is used as a way to keep all workers down. It's used as a way to pit one set of workers against another set of workers. It's used to create a sense of other when it should be a sense of us. And I think we realize at the Texas Afl Cio that until we can have a sane immigration reform that truly respects the humanity of each person, whether they're an immigrant, whether they're native born, and in many cases, it's both in families in Texas. Until we can treat every worker with dignity and respect, all workers are going to suffer. No, and it is critical that we get some immigration reform passed, because until we do, it's going to be a major wedge that's going to divide all of us.
And sadly, the more we allow to have undocumented people in the shadows, the easier they are to be exploited, the easier they are to be taken advantage of, and pull conditions down for everyone else. Exactly. You got to bring people out of the shadows. There's got to be a pathway to citizenship. We got to figure this out. And look, not everybody's going to be happy when you come up with the rules. Everybody's going to be mad about something, but you have to have a way forward.
Yeah, and I would just say one other thing about bringing people out of the shadows. Yes, it's important that we all get pulled down when certain people don't have rights. But when you talk to people and you listen to their story and you listen to their experience, you can't deny their humanity. And I think part of what happens is we push things off to the side, so we never have to really confront what we're doing. The children that go to school every day not knowing if when they come home their parents are going to be there. The parents who have literally trekked across continents to try and scrape out a better life for their kids. You don't hear that. You don't see that. And so you're able to not take that into account in terms of what you think should happen.
No, I say it all the time. If I was on the southern end of the border and I'm looking across that line at a way to feed my kids, there's nothing stopping me.
Okay. So Rick, when you say that, when my middle son was 13 years old, we took a trip to the border. This was maybe 15 years ago. And there's a group that goes down. We meet with factory workers on the other side of the border, people that work for these huge corporations like Philips and General Motors and get paid just nothing. And we had dinner in some of the homes of the folks across the border. And it was, they were made out of corrugated tin, no floors, no running water. And we sat and we talked to the workers and we said, why do you stay here? Look across the board. And they said, this is our home. This is where we live. This is our country. We want to make it work here. It's sometimes we become desperate. And I remember going back with my son on the bus, and I told him, I said, look, just what you said. I said, if it was ever the case that we found ourselves by the luck of the draw, born on this side of the border in these conditions, I guarantee you that I would spend every single day doing everything I possibly could to get across so that I could provide a life for you that I believe you deserve as a human being. And when you see people in our country that have made that same journey, you understand what it is that they have gone through to be where they are. And when you look in somebody's eyes, that's what you see. You don't see other, you see a fellow human being who's desperately trying to provide something for their family.
Yeah, and at the end of this, where I come back to, as a working person, as a trade unionist, the wealth class has always been able to use that division to keep us pitted against one another, so that we don't go after them. Clearly. Yeah. And you look at the fact that we haven't had major labor law reform in this country that has benefited workers in 70 plus years. We haven't had things that help us organize. All it is about is helping corporations and helping the very wealthy. And we're in this weird little moment. I look at someone like Ted Cruz, who's down there now talking about infant babies and breastfeeding mothers and how he now cares. And I'm going, what have you done to help them? What have you done to help any working person?
Well, in all fairness to Ted, Rick, I know you're a journalist. You have, you pay attention to the truth. He has voted with workers 6% of the time in his career. So, I don't think we can discount that 6% in terms of his commitment to working class people. It's, when I see him trying to say that, he's the party of working class people now from his porch in Cancun during the storm, I'll tell you how you become a friend to working people, Ted. You vote for the PRO Act. You give people the right to organize. You restore the balance between workers and corporations in this country. That's what you do. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't even come talk to us about how you're representing working people.
No, look, you're at least Donald Trump showed up in Puerto Rico to throw some paper towels out. Ted ran away. This is the weird thing. And this is where, since you brought up, down in Texas during the storm, how are you doing? I know the last time we talked, things were a little dicey. How are things recovering?
Things are recovering, although, now we're seeing the real economic fallout. There's still people who don't have water, which is amazing. But we see the scrambling now to cover up for the utilities that actually made a fair degree of money during this whole process, shockingly. And we learned that, this whole system now in Texas, our utility system was designed by Enron. So that ought to tell you something. Literally, the deregulation that we live under was born and paid for by Enron back in the early part of this century. Right. So it's no surprise that when things fall apart, things go pretty well for the folks at the top. But we're having skyrocketing electricity bills. We're having people having to pay for repairs of frozen plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still a lot of economic dislocation. And, we're still trying to make sure that everybody that we can help gets power and gets water back on in their houses.
Our thoughts and hope goes out to
Thank
them.
You.
As my friend Greg Palast, said, you guys got Ken laid. It was what it was.
It was what it was. I was there. I was in the Capitol. I saw it. And Ken Lay and that whole crew, they were treated like conquering heroes, man. They had this great new idea. We were going to deregulate everything so they could make all the money in the world. And now we're paying for it 20 years later.
No, this is what it is. The wealthy get wealthier and the rest of us, not so much, which is why what I'm looking at going on down in Bessemer, Alabama is so important. The fact that those workers to this point have been courageous and have cast their ballots. I'm waiting for the vote returns. I'm hoping for something positive. But this again is another reason why we need the PRO Act, because I think what we saw, and I think this was a very public display, is all of the things that corporate America has been getting away with for decades. Only now it's been magnified because, it's the giant behemoth Amazon.
Yeah. Shocked that workers get fired for trying to organize unions. I mean, it happens every day. And if anything points out the need for the PRO Act, this organizing campaign and what those workers are going through points it out. But I want to say one other thing about that. And I'm saying that regardless of the outcome of this election, this organizing campaign has rocked the world. And let me tell you, there are millions or maybe not millions, thousands of Amazon workers around this country that never even knew they had the option to organize a union. There's hundreds of thousands of people who work in warehouses around this country that had no idea that a union was something they could do. And now you hear the president talking about it. So yes, I'll say this. I'll say yes, we need to pass the PRO Act, and this is an amazing opportunity to do it. But unions need to also understand, and the thing that's exciting about Amazon is that unions now do understand that if we're going to win in this country, we have to organize the South, because what happens in the South doesn't stay with the South anymore. Our biggest export is crazy right-wing politicians. And until we can figure out a way to change the South, we're still going to be dealing with the Ted Cruzes of the world. Look, the difference between Texas and California, it's not who lives there, it's the size and strength of the labor movement. And so our responsibility is to build the labor movement in places like Texas and Alabama and Louisiana and Florida and Mississippi and Virginia and Carolina. Because when we do that and we give workers a voice, not only do they have a voice in their job, they have a voice in their communities, and we can change the politics of this country. And when we change the politics of this country, we change the world. And we have the ability to do that in the South if we can all come together and really figure out the way to organize for workers in the South.
No, you're spot on. And as I always say, what the boss fears most is an empowered employee. Someone who feels they have the right to have their voice heard and the right to share in the profits that their labor creates. That the wealth class wants none of that.
There's a really funny thing. I'll say that I don't know how much time we got, but there's we're in the middle of our legislative session now, and this right-wing Republican filed this bill, and I think it was he filed it after the insurrection, and it was a bill that made it illegal to fire an employee because they did something off the job that the employer disagreed with, right? So it's basically guaranteeing First Amendment rights in the workplace for workers for conduct that takes place out of the workplace. And so I'm saying, you know what really would do that? Unions, And so when this bill comes up for hearing, he's going to be shocked when we all show up testifying for his bill about how great it is for workers.
No, there you go. I'm with you on that.
Democracy would not stop at the plant gate.
There you go. They want to protect people who are involved in treason. You just want to protect people who go to work and do a good job. Rick, I appreciate the time. Great talk with you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
It's really fun. Thanks for doing the work. Thanks for raising your voice so consistently. And anytime y'all want to talk, we're ready.
Beautiful stuff. Thanks so much. Rick Levy, president of the Texas Afl Cio. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day that ground was broken on what would become one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. At least 476 and possibly more than 700 men died from a disease called silicosis. The project was called the Hawk's Nest Tunnel. It was part of a hydroelectric project by the company Union Carbide. The aim was to harness the energy of the New River in West Virginia to power a metals plant. Workers cut through 3 miles of solid rock under the Gauley Mountain to divert water for the project. Most of the workers were black men recruited from the South. Much of the rock they were cutting through had a very high silica content. Despite the fact that the dangers of silica dust were well known, the company ignored standard safety practices. It is safer to drill through high silica content using a wet drill method, which cuts down on the dust. The project manager opted to use dry drilling to save time on the project. They also failed to provide the needed ventilation or respirators for the workers. Men desperate for work during the Great Depression flocked to the project. In all, nearly 5,000 men labored on the tunnel. A congressional subcommittee that investigated the disaster found that the whole driving of the tunnel was begun, continued, and completed with grave and inhumane disregard of all consideration for the health, lives, and future of the employees. For many, work on the Hawks Tunnel was a death sentence. People with silicosis die a slow, agonizing, suffocating death. The companies involved in the project faced litigation, but in the end, they only paid out $200,000 in damages. Some that were impacted received as little as $30 for their lives.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm getting a kick out of that. I got to look up the legislation that Rick Levy was talking about. This legislator came out with that you can't fire somebody for something they do off the job, but you could easily fire them for anything that they do on the job. So insurrection, not a fireable offense. Wearing blue shoes, completely fireable. Let that sink in for a second. How stupid some of these legislators are. I know. Look, there isn't an IQ test. These are folks who quite clearly won the popularity contest. But it starts me down this path of thinking about, and I think Rick Levy hit on a perfect and really important point. The campaign at Amazon has been, magnified with all of the media coverage and all of the people who are on top of this. And it's exposed what people like me have known for decades. That you get these union busting firms who come out and they've got these ideas on how to do all of this craziness. And how they do this insane stuff that they get away with that are legal, like walking through a plant with a sandwich board, talking about how bad the unions are, posting things in the bathroom stalls of telling you how bad the unions are, the captive audience meetings where they have 5 supervisors in a room and they bring you in to question, to educate you, and they're not questioning you about your vote, but they're wondering which way you're leaning. They're not trying to intimidate. They're trying to educate. And of course, the constant captive audience meetings where all of your coworkers are in a room and they're browbeating all of you, and both serve different purposes. The first one, where they pull you in individually with 5 supervisors surrounding you, is to intimidate you. That we have power. We're in control here. We're the dictators. You, the lowly servant, you, the little peon, you, the one who can't afford to lose this job. We are in control. And that's what that's about. They make that very clear, who's in charge. Now, the bigger group meetings are really about groupthink. They really want to gauge, people, who's looking at who, if anyone dares speak up. Because then you know who the troublemakers are. And those are the people you target. Because you can't fire them for union organizing, but you can fire them for anything else. And evidently in Texas, if they get this law passed, insurrection you can't be fired for. Which, let that sink in for a minute. But I think what's happened, and I think Rick Levy was right, even if they don't get the votes to win the election, what they've done is they've exposed how badly broken our labor laws are, how much control corporate America has in drawing this campaign out, and doing some, really just bizarre tactics. I mean, there are stories that Amazon was paying the police to harass people coming in and out of work, harassing the organizers. They paid the city to change the speed at which the red lights go so that nobody has to wait at the red light, so the organizers can't talk to them. Because understand, they build these compounds, these massive compounds, where you can't just walk into them. It's all private property. You can be on the sidewalk, which is why a lot of them don't build sidewalks. But you can be on maybe the public. Can't be in the road, because the police will arrest you for being in the road. And they do this on purpose so that basically organizing these folks are impossible. In the old days, what would happen is the union would have a bunch of people go get jobs there and organize from within. It was called salting. That's illegal. Thank you, Supreme Court. You can't have people with the intention of saying, "Hey, coworkers, we've got something good for you. We've got this thing called a contract. That means you can't be fired for no reason at all. That ends at will employment. That you can be fired for just cause." And look, the insurrectionists, the criminals who broke into our Capitol, even with a union contract, they'd be fired because, well, you broke the law. Union contracts don't protect people from breaking the law. That's kind of one of the great things about it. Doesn't let companies doing it, and doesn't let workers get away with it either. We don't want criminals. But I look at this and Rick's right. There's an opportunity here for people in warehouses across this country who didn't even know they had the option. Didn't know it was possible, because we've gone, and I've been seeing this more and more as I've gotten a little bit older. My generation, I knew the people who fought the battles. I knew people who had their heads split open on picket lines back in the 50s and 60s. I knew people who got shot on picket lines. I knew people who they were the ones who shed blood to win the 8-hour workday, to win, safe working conditions, to win better health care and better retirement security. All of the things that, my generation took for granted because we just got it. And when you see I forget who it was, one of those right-wing think tanks, American Enterprise Institute, competitive, Americans for Puppies and Profits, whatever. They came out with a poll that I think is probably pretty accurate, that 94% of union members didn't organize their unions. We've lost that understanding of what it takes. And I would also argue that the laws have been so badly broken and stacked against people from organizing that it's near impossible. It's near a major struggle. And I've been a part of a number of organizing campaigns over the years. And, some of them successful, a lot of them not, because employers will do anything and everything because they know there's no penalty. There's no real penalty of breaking the law. It's not like the NLRB is going to come in and impose the union on them. They're sorry. Okay, we'll post a notice of how sorry we are. And if they fire someone, which they do a lot to send a chilling effect through the workplace, all they have to pay back as of right now is what the employee would have lost minus whatever they earned while they were off working. So if they went and they got a job making the exact same amount of money, cost the company nothing. Well, they did have to post the notice. We're sorry. That's how screwed up our laws are. And I talk to people all the time and go, look, I would love to have a union here. I would love to have a contract. I'd love to be able to see how much profit this company makes so that we can share in it. That is for me. And again, it's back to my beliefs. There are a bunch of things that I think union membership brings: empowerment, the sense that you have the right to have your voice heard, that you have the right to safe working conditions, that you have the right to a reasonable standard of living. I think that's contagious. But when you sit down with the company and they open up the books and they have, that's part of the negotiation. Here's what we made, and now you start dickering over how much of it we get. You get some, we get some. which is why I say all the time, I want the company to be wildly profitable so that we can take some of that. Because after all, our labor is what created that. And this is what the Amazon workers are figuring out. Amazon came out and said, oh, we're going to pay $15 an hour. They didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They didn't do it because they're benevolent. They did it because people were demanding the political winds were moving in that direction. And it's a good sales pitch for, hey, you're making $15 an hour. You don't want to risk that by joining that union. Never mind the fact that when unions were at their strength, that $15 an hour Amazon job was like a $27 warehouse job. Never mind that. And never mind that it had better health care and better retirement security. Never mind that. It's the distraction. And I'm hoping no matter what happens in this Amazon campaign, the fact that this happened in Bessemer, Alabama, and Rick's got the point. You got to organize the South. You got to organize the South. And a big part of what has to happen, like it or not, got to pass the PRO Act. PRO Act has to happen. And the part specific is undoing some of the really horrible stuff that Taft-Hartley brought in. Ending this designation as a right-to-work state. If you give me some rights and you give me some work, let's talk. But there are no rights, there's no work. All there is the right to divide workers, the right of people to freeload off of others. And look, the employer class understands this. They understand that if you can cause division in the ranks, they can exploit that. When I talk about any issue, I bring it back to that of a working person. Talk about race relations in this country. We got to figure that out and quick, because what happens? We're always pitted against one another. Always pitted against one another on racial lines, on gender lines, on sexual orientation lines. Like, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do in the confines of your four walls. What I care about is when you're on the job, you're safe, you're paid well, you have health security, you have retirement security. And why do I care about that? Because if you have it, there's a good chance I'm going to get it. There's a good chance the guy next to me is going to get it. My neighbor is going to get it. And we're going to have a stronger society, a society that does better together. Look how division has worked out for us this long. Look how being ripped apart has done for the working class of this country. Look what it's done to the quote-unquote middle class. And I've always hated that term. I want a prosperous working class. I don't care what you do. You should be able to make a good living by the labor that you produce. But Ted Cruz and his ilk, they want to divide us on Joe Biden did this all himself. There are infant babies. Look at this tragedy, this crisis that Joe Biden created. I'm going, no, this has been going on for decades. And the last time someone like Ted Cruz did his job was back during the George W. Bush years. That was the last time there was any serious push to have immigration reform, to have an actual policy on how we're going to deal with these things, other than leaving it up to executive order or whoever is at the border. We've got to have a comprehensive strategy of how we're going to deal with all of this. Because look, as a working person, the immigration issue is important because you cannot have exploitable labor in any industry. It will tear that industry down. And that's what it's done to the wages. We need to unite around the idea that, we need immigrants. As a country, we do. We need young workers. We need people who are hungry and ready to innovate and do the things that generations of immigrants have done. We need that. We can't fling the doors wide open and bring everybody in. So that's where the political part of this has to come in. Those elected leaders, those 18 that trek down to the border, why don't they come back to D.C. and come up with a plan and actually do some work around getting something done? You know why? Because they want us pitted against one another. They want us divided. They want us arguing over this. You know why? So that we're not going, hey, Jeff Bezos has got $1 gazillion. They made $1.25 trillion in profit over the pandemic. Just a handful of people. That ain't right. What? They're corporate America is paying the lowest tax rate that it's paid since corporate taxes have ever been imposed. That ain't right. We're not talking about that stuff. No. We're talking about infant babies. I'll tell you, I'm heartbroken that there are infant. I've had three kids myself. I can't imagine the heartache. I can't imagine how horrible their parents are feeling. But it's infant babies. And never mind the fact that infants are babies, and that older babies who aren't infants still do breastfeed. But never mind any of that, Ted Cruz. This is just that moment where you go, what exactly have they done? What are their positions? How are they going to make things better? And look, I'm looking forward to Joe Biden's speech. I think this administration can be transformative if we just got on the same page and moving in the same direction. They're talking about major investments in our country that can jump our economy like we've not seen in my lifetime. And we could put people to work with sound investment and smart policy. Instead, what are we talking about? We got the 18 senators who went down for the excursion down on the border, showed up at midnight and shot themselves a little video. So they could, say, it's Joe Biden's fault. In a year, if things aren't better, if we haven't moved towards, then yeah, it's Joe Biden's fault. 2 months in, not Joe Biden's fault yet. They haven't had time to really find where the bathrooms are. But I'll tell you, this administration so far, they're doing the work. They're putting in the work. And that's at this point all I can hope for. So I'm hoping that the distractions that are Ted Cruz, that are the Boberts and the Gates and the rest of those folks, I hope we come back to talking about what's really important. How we rebuild our economy and make it work for all of us. How we truly push forward and rebuild the American dream. The idea that we can work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead. I talk to people all the time, Trump supporters too. They still believe that. And guess what? They want it. And this again comes back to where smart policy, sound investment matters. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out, how the corporate Dems, and there's no help from the Republicans. We'll see how this plays out, but I'm looking forward to the big speech. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. The most important word in the language of the working class is solidarity. Those inspiring words were spoken by labor leader Harry Bridges, who died on this day in labor history. The year was 1990. Harry was born into a middle-class family in Melbourne, Australia. At the age of 14, his father put him to work collecting rents in Melbourne slums, an experience that gave young Harry a heart for struggling people. At 16, he joined the Merchant Marines, landing in the United States just 3 years later. At the San Francisco docks, he joined the International Longshore Association, which was organizing against the company union. On May 9, 1934, Harry helped lead a strike of the West Coast docks. Furious shipping company owners and politicians retaliated violently on what became known as Bloody Thursday. Police beat, shot, and wounded longshoremen up and down the coast. Employers offered Bridges a $50,000 bribe to win his support, but he refused. The union's leadership leadership brokered a deal to end the strike, but the dock workers roundly rejected it. Instead of settling, Bridges contacted other unions at port cities and convinced them to support a general strike. The general strike lasted 4 days and won the longshoremen an agreement that included shorter hours, increased pay, and safer working conditions. 3 years later, Bridges split from the International Longshore Association and helped found the International Longshore Workers Union, affiliated under the CIO. Harry became the West Coast director for the CIO. Throughout his life, Harry advocated for democratic unionism, including open mics at meetings, direct elections of union leaders by rank-and-file membership, and member referendums on contract proposals. The U.S. government continually harassed Bridges, accusing him of communist sympathies. Despite this harassment, the ILWU became one of the leading voices of the U.S. labor movement. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Ralph Waldo Emerson told of a dinner guest who went on and on about the virtue of honesty, offering his own life as a model of perfect rectitude. The louder he talked of his honor, said Emerson, the faster we counted our spoons. That's my reaction to the cacophony of phony piety arising from Republican governors and legislators who are trying to enact more than 250 new state laws to stop black, Latino, Asian American, indigenous, and other non-Caucasian voters from casting ballots. Yet they proclaim, we're not racists, we're righteous crusaders protecting the sanctity of the vote. Really? So why are they specifically targeting people of color with their repressive voting restrictions? For example, panicky Republican lawmakers in Georgia tried to outlaw any early voting on Sundays. Odd. Why? It's a flagrantly racist attack on the black church. For years, a joyous civic tradition called Souls to the Polls has played out in Southern black churches on Sundays prior to Election Day. After the sermon and prayers, congregants, ministers, musicians, and others in the church family travel in a caravan to early voting locations to cast ballots. It turns voting into a civic, spiritual, and fun experience. What kind of shriveled soul tries to kill that? Apparently, the same shameful souls in the Georgia GOP who want to stop local groups from providing water and snacks to citizens forced to wait for hours in line to vote. They're actually trying to make it a crime to give water to thirsty voters. Hey, Republicans, what would Jesus do? This is Jim Hightower saying the goal and duty of every public official ought to be to maximize voter turnout. After all, the more Americans who vote, the stronger our democracy. But there's the ugly political truth. Republican officials no longer support democracy. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Yeah, I saw the Washington Post headline, G. Gordon Liddy, undercover operative convicted in Watergate scandal, dies at 90. And I was like, wow, I'm surprised he lived that long. But as I read the article, the first couple lines were, G. Gordon Liddy, the undercover operative whose bungling of the Watergate break-in triggered one of the gravest constitutional crises in American history and led to the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon, died March 30th at his daughter's home in Fairfax County, Virginia. He was 90. I'm going, I don't know that's what I want on my headstone. The guy who bungled, the greatest bungling in history that led to a constitutional crisis. But there he is. And look, I remember years the Republicans were really trying to, make him out to be more than just the guy who bungled everything. They were trying to revise history, and they a little bit. Now full revision mode, where Trump is saying, the people who killed the police officer, they were really hugging and kissing him. Yeah, because that's how affection is done in the Trump household. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the craziness, maybe a little bit on Gordo. I've asked our good friend Peter Montgomery to come talk with us. Peter's a senior fellow at the People for America's Way Right Wing Watch. You can check out their website, rightwingwatch.org. Peter, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, thoughts on the passing of 90-year-old G. Gordon Liddy?
Well, it's one of those things at first when you saw it, I thought, oh, I wasn't sure he was still around. And then you think, he was such a character. He's almost like a combination of people we see today, maybe a little bit of Steve Bannon, a little bit of Mike Flynn. I mean, you can think of a lot of Roger Stone. You can think literally kind of combined a lot of the traits of some of the MAGA world characters we see.
Yeah, you got to wonder how many of those he mentored over the years. You think of him, like Lee Atwater and that crew, because we've got Karl Rove today, thanks to Lee Atwater. I wonder how many Gordolites are out there.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of them. It'll be interesting to see. I'm sure some of them putting out their statements in the next couple of days.
Yeah, we'll see. And on the seventh day, the Lord said, "Let there be hypocrites," and there was John Hagee. Am I getting this story right? That the televangelist John Hagee, who said that Jesus is the vaccine, actually went and got the vaccine himself?
Some of these guys are, it's kind of like Donald Trump, right? He got the vaccine, but he wouldn't get his picture taken doing it. And so he's sort of playing it both ways with his own followers, trying to, not upset the ones who are positioning themselves that the vaccine is a tool of government control. And yet at the same time, he's trying to take credit for the fact that we now have the vaccine rolling out. So, with him at the top of the movement, it's hard to hold anybody in the movement to any kind of standard because he's pretty much violated them all.
No, I mean, well, look, we got Ted Cruz. You got Ted Cruz down at the border talking about infant babies and how Joe Biden has created this massive crisis. Like he's just now discovered that we've had, thousands of people crammed into unsanitary and unsafe conditions for the last several years. He just now found out.
Yeah, we all remember those Ted Cruz trips down to the border to hold Donald Trump accountable, don't we?
No, I think he was down there helping to push up the wall, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
No, it's just crazy. And you look at someone like Hagee, who on one side of his mouth is saying, no, all you need is Jesus, and I'm washed in the blood of Jesus. That's what protects me. And then go and get the vaccine. It makes me look at someone like this Marjorie Taylor Greene now, who evidently getting the vaccine mark of the beast. I don't even know what she was talking about. Explain it to me.
Well, I was going to say, at least Hagee is telling people to get the vaccine. That's, at least he's putting out a responsible public health message with that. Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the idea of businesses, using people's vaccine status to decide whether or not they should, go to group events or sit inside. She's calling it the mark of the beast, and that is just playing off of conspiracy theories we've seen about, some kind of Bill Gates microchip is going to be in the vaccine if you take it. The conspiracy theories around the vaccine and resistance to the vaccine have come from all kinds of angles on the right, the QAnon that she's part of, but also the religious right that she's part of. A lot of the religious right leaders were at the forefront of downplaying the virus, of leading resistance to public health, social distancing measures and restrictions on gatherings because that affected churches. And they've really been at the forefront. And now you have some people like Eric Metaxas, who positions himself as this public intellectual, has this radio show. He's telling people flat out, don't get the vaccine. So that's really irresponsible, but unfortunately not surprising.
No, I mean, but you've had these characters and these kooks for a very long time. The anti-vax movement isn't surprising. What is surprising, though, is how many people have been, I guess the interesting word is infected by their insanity. There was just a report done the other day I talked about that something like 12 people are responsible for like 3/4 of all the anti-vax information on Facebook. 12 people. So they have this megaphone and this outsized belief, because I've yet to find in person a Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of these people who say, no, we're not going to get the vaccine because some crazy kooky idea. Most people I know go, hey, look, I've got a medical condition. I've got something that they're warning against. There's been a lot of thought into it. But I've yet to find one of these really crazy kooky folks. And if there are any out there, please contact me because I really want to understand.
Well, yeah, and some of it is being it's being pushed by the same people who are behind a lot of the Trump era conspiracy theories. New York Times the other day had an article on how a lot of the Stop the Steal crowd, the activists who was pushing the lies about the stolen election, have now pivoted, and they're pushing anti-vaccine messaging, partly because they see it as now it's an anti-Biden message, partly because portraying the vaccine and vaccine requirements and this talk of a passport as all about, government tyranny. And they love to accuse the left of just getting ready to take tyrannical control and use the power of the government to shut down liberty. So they're focusing that now on the vaccine,
right? Which Marjorie Taylor Greene came up with a new phrase: corporate communism. I don't care if it's fascism or communism or corporate communism. I'm going, by using big words, it doesn't make you sound smart. By using them wrong makes you sound really dumb. Stop it.
That's right. Especially when you say things like, well, you call it communism, call it fascism, whatever. I mean, yeah, those words actually have meaning. And corporate communism is a strange term. But that's it's
it's fascism.
Right, yes. The right these days is very upset about big tech. And so she's trying to get that in there too. That's partly, I think, why they like to focus on Bill Gates as this idea that the virus is going to change your DNA, or some of these other crazy theories that are out there. But they're also now, I think, Liberty Council, which is one of the big religious right legal groups, is kind of now gearing up a big campaign to try to make it a religious liberty issue to oppose the vaccine, because a lot of vaccines have been developed over the years, and the research that vaccines are based on at some point in the past used fetal cells that anyway, so they're making this one more plank in their quest to make religious liberty sort of a tool, an all-purpose tool for people to use to avoid government regulation.
Yeah, it's crazy, but it made me think, because I had talked about this a while ago, because there's a sect of the Catholic Church, one of the crazy right-wing bishop groups, they were opposing using a certain vaccine, and they put it out there, shouldn't use this. And it made me think about a guy that I knew years ago who he used to go to one of those snake venom churches where they reach into boxes and they grab the snake out. And I guess the theory is, and how he explained it, is if the snake bites you, it's the will of God, and I guess you're supposed to die. And I said, so what happens if you get bitten? He goes, we've got the anti-venom in back. And I'm going, well, what's the point? What's the point of doing that? Aren't you usurping the will of God? Shouldn't you be dead? And he's like, no, if God didn't want us to have the anti-venom, he wouldn't have given us the ability to create it. So for me, that kind of argument, which is twisted logic, but interesting, could apply to the vaccine. If God didn't want us to have fetal cells helping us do this, he wouldn't have allowed us to do it.
Well, yeah, and that argument about, it gets very complicated when you start portraying everything to the will of God or not to the will of God. And, I think you can look at it as God gave us minds and he gave us science. And I think it's an amazing thing what scientists have done for us in developing these vaccines that are going to save millions and millions of lives. And to have religious or political leaders out there trying to convince people not to get them because they want to make a political point is it's worse than irresponsible. It's a really immoral thing to be doing, I think.
Yeah, but I look at this. I look at the job that you guys do at Right Wing Watch, and I don't know how you do it. I don't know how every day you track these insane people. I can listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene for about 6 seconds before I just go, please stop. I know something really stupid's going to come. I look at someone like Michelle Bachmann. Evidently, she's back now too. What brought her back?
Well, she never really went away. She's always been active on the religious right. She was doing work at the United Nations and other places, but she's got a new perch now thanks to Pat Robertson's Regent University, they back in December hired her as the new dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. So now she, can call herself a university dean, and she hosted a day-long conference recently on the stolen election mythology, and talked about having this academic thing. This academic post that she has makes it seem like there's intellectual seriousness when she hosts this conference, where she allowed everybody on the right who promotes stolen election conspiracies to speak. And the centerpiece of it was a presentation by Jim and Joe Hoff from Gateway Pundit. And if you make them the centerpiece of a conference, and you expect anybody to take you seriously, who's not part of the far right,
No, we're really in scary times because, we're giving people like Michelle Bachmann, who, is sadly crazy. We're putting her into positions of high authority, as if Congresswoman wasn't bad enough. Now the head of a university, where you have some academic standing, where people are going to send their kids to get hopefully a well-rounded education, or a very one-track minded, very single-minded education, which I guess is what this stuff's turned into, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, and I think, I'm worried that we're going to see even more of it. We've got the last election brought us Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, and the same kind of folks who voted them into office are now working very hard to bring a lot more in. A lot of the Stop the Steal activists on the right who were trying to overturn the election results for the couple months between the election and the inauguration are now really focused on trying to run far right MAGA Republicans against all the Republicans who either voted for Trump's impeachment or did not vote to challenge the electoral college results. So they're trying to recruit more of those folks to run and get more of them into Congress. So we may see the Marjorie Taylor Greene caucus growing in a couple of years. Hopefully we can, all work together and mobilize to try to stop that. But in a lot of these deep red districts that gerrymandering has brought us, if some of those folks can win the Republican primary, it's almost impossible to stop them from taking office.
No, you're right. And the sad thing is you look at what's going on in Georgia with this voting scam that they've come up with. That this is traveling across the country as well. There are bills similar to all of them, in legislatures across the country. I mean, the Georgia thing is so ridiculous. I mean, you can't hand out bottles of water. I mean, they've gone down to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that was just indefensible. I'm surprised that they even included that because it's so brazen. There's just no way to defend that. I think it tells you, it shows you what this is really about. This is really about discouraging people from voting.
Yep.
And, as much as they all try to portray themselves as defenders of election integrity, and that's their buzz phrase now, election integrity, that's the excuse they're using to try to impose all these new restrictions on voting in states around the country. And, you don't improve an election's integrity by keeping people from voting. You're diminishing it. You're trying to rig the elections. And that's what's happening. Unfortunately, we're seeing that too many Republicans are not that interested really in defending democracy if it might cost them power. And so they're willing to sacrifice democracy to keep people from voting in order to perpetuate their own power. And it's shameful that they got a majority in the legislature, and it's shameful that the government signed it. And fortunately, some progressive organizations have already challenged the Georgia law in court, and I know that'll be happening around the country if other states follow suit. But it's also really going to require us to work even harder to get people out to vote in 2022 so that they're not successful. They're not successful in using these, new Jim Crow tactics to roll back the voting rights gains that we made, decades ago.
This all comes back for me to the Roberts Court. If Shelby doesn't get passed, we don't have a lot of these problems. If they don't decide that Shelby versus Tennessee or Shelby versus Holder case, a lot of this doesn't happen. They're still going to do all the things that they've tried, but a lot of the stuff in this scary. Now, I did you see the state representative? I think her name was something like Park Cannon. I think her name was. Was arrested for just knocking on the door as the governor was signing. And then the cop who arrested her said, something, he had like flashbacks or something about January 6th. That
yes. Yeah, that was so ridiculous. Here's an elected official, in the Capitol where she's been elected to represent people knocking on the door. And for them to try to equate that with the riot and people been attacking police, it's laughable, really. I mean, I think it's not laughable that they have actually charged her with felonies, and I don't think that's going to stand. I don't think people will stand for it, and I think it's just an embarrassment for the state of Georgia.
It is,
and I know that activists are really trying to bring pressure on some of the big Georgia-based corporations like Coca-Cola to take a stand against this kind of voter suppression from the state Republicans. And it's also, that's why we need the Democrats, while they have the power in Congress, we need them to pass legislation to protect voting rights. We need them to pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Those measures are there that would preempt these state voter suppression laws. And we really need to mobilize and pressure Democrats to get those into law.
Got a lot of work ahead of us. And while the crazies do provide some bit of entertainment, sadly, they wield some bit of power, and you have to pay attention to them. And I'm glad that you guys do. I hope folks will check out your website over at Right Wing Watch. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Peter, always great talking with you. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Good stuff. Peter Montgomery, senior fellow there at the People for the Americans Ways Right Wing Watch. It's a mouthful to say. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1870. That was the day the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was adopted. It was the third of the Reconstruction Amendments. It prohibited voting restrictions on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Premier historian Eric Foner states that the Reconstruction Amendments reflected, quote, a newly empowered national state and the idea of a national citizenry enjoying equality before the law. These legal changes also arose from the militant demands for equal rights from former slaves themselves. The bulk of southern states refused to ratify, but then capitulated. Interestingly, New York sought and failed to revoke its earlier ratification. The amendment split the women's suffrage movement for its failure to codify women's voting rights. Some radical Republicans also abstained on the basis that it did not also prohibit poll taxes and literacy tests. Immediately, the 15th Amendment came under attack. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black voters and Reconstruction governments for years. One of the most extreme examples was the 1873 Colfax Massacre. After the Compromise of 1877, President Rutherford B. Hayes refused to enforce civil rights protections. The rise of discriminatory Jim Crow laws effectively disenfranchised Southern blacks for nearly a century. Congress would finally enforce the 15th Amendment fully through the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, the act has come under attack most recently, as in the 2013 case Shelby versus Holder. Jurisdictions with histories of voter restrictions no longer have to obtain pre-clearance before implementing changes to voting laws and practices. Over 150 years after the end of the Civil War, African Americans are still fighting to protect their right to vote. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, I look at the whole class of crazy, the Boberts, the Greens, the ones who came in before him, like the Matt Gaetz, the guy from Florida. Again, it seems to be, you know, going back to something that Rick Levy said earlier, that you got to organize the South. You've got to do something about how crazy Southern politicians have become. You've got to get people educated, got to get them mobilized, because we have gotten some of just the craziest people in Congress, and a lot of them, sadly, from the South, from areas that are so badly gerrymandered that there's no competition. I don't like gerrymandering on any level unless you're doing it for the purpose of creating balance. I've said we should gerrymander to have an even fight, that we should draw districts in ways that look like giant monkeys, you know, swinging from trees, if it means that we get 50% and 50%, that every race is competitive. Because I want people fighting over ideas, not over who was able to draw the best lines. And I know where I'm at in Pennsylvania, they talk about compact and contiguous. We want to make sure that they're compact. Well, you know, you can move that around any way you want. I want competitive races. I want people to be fighting over ideas. And for me, the idea of having competitive races and not having a district like where Marjorie Taylor won in the primaries, and there was no stopping her. There was no competition there. It allows the right wing to move further and further to the extreme, as it does the left as well. I want people who are statesmen. I want people who are going to get things done. You know, they talk about, Tipper. They talk about Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They talk about Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. They got things done. I don't agree with all of the things they got done. In fact, some of it was not great. But we were doing something instead of stagnating and allowing the power to be accumulated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And I'm in this moment where this is all our fault. It's all we, the working people's fault, because we've been divided. We've allowed that to happen. We've allowed them to pit us against one another. And that's how our labor laws have gotten so broken. That's how the pendulum has swung so far. And that's why, all of the horrible things that we heard that Amazon was doing. And I got a couple of emails this week from people going, the scorched earth campaign that Amazon is undertaking is simply so that no union ever tries it again. I mean, they're spending millions of dollars on union busters to come in and intimidate and harass and do all of the things that they've been getting away with for decades. Because corporate America sees this as another one of those moments where if this little union, this little Southern union that's had roots in organizing the African-American community, if they win, that's going to be earth-shattering. And it's going to mean that other people are going to want to do it too. And I go back to, we need legislation like the PRO Act, something even maybe a little bit better, or maybe just go back to the original intent of the National Labor Relations Act. Undo all of the horrible damage that's been done by decades of Republican rule. Because remember, Taft-Hartley was passed over the veto of Harry Truman. By who? Our GOP friends. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, this is amazing that these folks have been on strike as long as they have. In New York City, Spectrum Cable has been on strike since March of 2017. We've reached out a number of times over the years to get people on. Finally, we're going to get someone to come share some thoughts on what this 4-year-long strike has been, why it's going on, and maybe how we can help move them along. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. Quick break. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
China is investing 3 times more in infrastructure than the United States is.
Biden previews massive infrastructure investment to address climate resilience and global competition. Deadly torrential rains and floods sweep through Nashville. Plus,
the traffic is resuming.
Stuck container ship in Suez Canal freed, thanks in part to global warming.
Thanks, global warming. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
When you look at how big that ship is, I'm not surprised that it got stuck. And the crazy thing is, that whole ship is just delivering 2 AA batteries. Yeah, the rest is just extra packaging.
True. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the ship is now free.
Yes, that huge container ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal for a week that exposed the fragility of the global supply chain network. Yes, that ship that was freed on Monday, thanks in part to man-made global warming.
Hey!
The massive ship was refloated by a higher than usual spring tide, which was boosted by rising sea levels, which was driven by warming ocean temperatures.
And you say climate change is no good for nothing. See there? You're wrong again.
Here in the U.S., as we go to air, at least 6 people have been killed in flash floods in Nashville, Tennessee, triggered by the second highest rainfall in the region on record. 7 inches of intense rain overnight Sunday destroyed dozens of homes and businesses. More than 100 people had to be rescued from fast rising waters that overwhelmed the city's flood control systems.
Okay, I'm changing my opinion about climate change.
In the first press conference of his term late last week, President Joe Biden focused on the accelerating impacts of extreme weather disasters turbocharged by man-made climate change and gave a preview of his massive $3 trillion infrastructure proposal that he will announce later this week. Biden noted that China's annual investment in infrastructure is 3 times that of the United States. Biden said upgrading the nation's crumbling infrastructure and building out clean energy will increase U.S. competitiveness and productivity, boost climate resilience, revive the economy, and create jobs.
6 to 10 million homes in America still have lead pipes servicing their water lines. We have over 100,000 wellheads that are not capped, leaking methane. What are we doing? And by the way, we can put as many pipe fitters and miners and us to work capping those wells at the same price that they would charge to dig those wells.
And to kick things off, the Biden White House on Monday announced a new offshore wind energy initiative. The Departments of the Interior, Energy, and Commerce will coordinate to reach 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy projects by 2030. For perspective, construction will soon begin on America's first major commercial offshore wind project. This new initiative targets the equivalent of about 40 times that in 9 years. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki highlighted the initiative's jobs potential.
Meeting this target will create tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs, with more than 44,000 workers employed in offshore wind by 2030, and nearly 33,000 additional jobs in communities supported by offshore wind activity.
Tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs.
Yep. And building and upgrading infrastructure for climate resiliency matters and would save lives. Texas officials doubled the death toll from the deadly Texas blackout in February to 111 people who did not survive the storm, most killed by hypothermia in their own homes because the record winter storm shut down the state's unprotected, unweatherized electric grid.
And that was unprotected and unweatherized because Texas decided to leave it up to the utility companies whether they wanted to winterize those pipes.
Estimates of economic losses from that one single storm could be as high as $130 billion, which, if confirmed, would make the Texas blackout the costliest weather disaster in U.S. history.
$130 billion and 111 lives.
But some good news for breathers in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Biden administration has withdrawn a parting gift from the Trump administration, revoking a key pollution permit that would have allowed the expansion of one of the nation's largest oil refineries, citing environmental justice concerns and the impact of pollution on the local community.
Good.
And finally, thanks to decades of sustained, intense conservation efforts since the 1960s, the population of the iconic American bald eagle has soared back from the brink of extinction in the lower 48, showing that conservation of endangered species can succeed when we, actually try.
Very good. Maybe we'll play some John Ashcroft music on the way out. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report. Sing it, John.
Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before, from rocky coast to golden shore. Let the mighty eagle soar, soar with healing.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I've talked about this strike. It's been a while. And to be honest, it fell off of my radar entirely. Early on, we tried to get people to come on and talk about it because it was 2017. It was, the Trump administration was, pointing people to the NLRB. There was all of this anti-worker, anti-union stuff going on with the Trump administration. Eventually, we end up getting the Janus decision out of the Supreme Court. And sadly, it fell off my radar until I had a guy who's been on strike this entire time direct message me on Twitter and say, hey, did you forget about us? And I said, no. In fact, I thought it was done. I thought the strike at Spectrum Cable was over, but I'm wrong. 4 years these people have been on strike. And here to share some thoughts on how, why, what, all of that stuff, I've asked Troy Walcott to come talk with us. He is one of the Spectrum strikers, was a shop steward there as well. Troy, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
4 years you're into this?
Yep. This 28th, this Sunday marked our 4th year anniversary of grief.
So I guess let's go to that day 4 years ago. What was it that made you guys go on strike? What was the final straw? Because look, nobody wants to go on strike, but it's usually the final arrow in the quiver. What was the breaking point?
There were plenty of attacks that were happening on the workers prior to that day. It even got to the point where we had gone in front of a judge and they declared that there was no contract in place. So we had been fighting for a while before that, trying to get a contract. And when it came to the date approaching for the date that we went on strike on March 28th, 2017, the company proceeded to try to negotiate what they called at that point. But their negotiation was, we're going to take away all of your medical, all of your retirement. We don't want the shop stewards to represent the men anymore. We want to be able to subcontract out your work. So that was the offer they put in front of us. We had no choice at that point to go out on strike.
Right. So basically they gave you an offer there was no way you could accept. And
Correct.
basically saying, we want you to go out on strike.
They gave us one we couldn't accept. When we said we didn't want that, they came back with one that was worse.
Yeah, that's the a classic union busting tactic to get you to go out so that they can starve you out. And 4 years, I mean, this is really a starve out and good on you guys for manning the picket line and keeping this up, because now I got to think this is almost a fight of not just, hey, we want to get respect on the job and hey, we want a decent wage. This has got to be, a David and Goliath kind of thing, because Spectrum Cable is a giant corporation.
Exactly. It's even more about us right now. Is number one, it's just to fight. If it's not right, it's not right, period. Not just for us, it's any other worker as well. But what happens if we fall? Everybody else is watching this. What happens to everyone else down the line that this can happen to? So it's not just about us, it's about everybody else. So we're supposed to be in a union town with union representation. So how can things like this happen here?
No, it's an excellent question. And you listen to Trump supporters who Donald Trump was good with unions. He worked with unions. He's a union. I've actually had union members tell me he supports unions. And I look at your situation in his hometown. 4 years you guys were on strike, and I think, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think a huge part of that is the fact that the National Labor Relations Board wouldn't move on any unfair labor practices. Because I got to be honest, offering you a worse contract, that almost sounds like that's tilting right there.
Yeah, it was spoken about. I mean, we did our anniversary special for our show, and we put it out recently, where the city council, that was back in 2017, where they took Spectrum to task just on the stuff they were doing at that time, and that was 2017. We had so many charges with the NLRB that just got totally ignored. It was a bad sign when I think it was the week of or right as we were going on strike, you see the CEO for Spectrum, who makes $100 million, standing in the Oval Office with the newly appointed President of the United States of America. Every decision that has happened in the NLRB right now to this time has either been some type of stall tactic, which hurts us, or some kind of, we don't even understand some of the decisions they're making. Like especially one that's happening right now with even the decertification attempt that's going on at the company.
So walk me through this, because you were telling me a minute ago that there's a decertification attempt happening. Because in a situation like this sometimes happens, not often. Sometimes someone will circulate the petition to break the union, so people will go back. Tell me about what's happening with you guys.
So what's happening with our decertification attempt? It was at the point, it's a 1 year mark where you're able to attempt this. So what they did is the people that they handpicked in order to replace us, the scab workers, they have one of them, his name was Bruce Carberry, who they hired as a supervisor. Right when that 1 year mark hit, he surprisingly dropped his level down from a supervisor to a technician. This allowed him to be able to file this decertification attempt. He has a lawyer representing him that I believe was also a union busted lawyer that works for some a Verizon strike prior. So I'm not sure how he paid this high priced lawyer, but right now they're filing he was able to file the decertification, and they're trying to be able to allow all the workers who are not part of the union to be able to vote out the union that they're not part of currently in place. Wow. And that's what we stand right now with that.
I mean, you think of all of these dirty tricks and all of these tactics, and it's incredible what corporate America gets away with. And as you said, when you see the CEO who's making $100 million a year standing next to the president, the guy who appoints all the people to the NLRB, who's going to make the decision whether you get to be in a union, whether you get the unfair labor practices charges decided in your favor, that's got to just sink to the pit of your stomach that something's amiss here.
Right. And then you look at it, if they're not helping you, then what's going to do? You look to your local officials. So you look to your local officials for help, like, this is a union town. We should be able to, at least, if you can't do something, at least make sure that it's known what's going on. Make sure that you disapprove with them. Any city contracts that they have, they shouldn't be getting. We should not be supporting them anymore. But sometimes you hear a lot of talk of how we support you and support what you're doing, but we're the ones losing stuff. People right now are still losing homes, marriages are tearing apart. And right now, most elected officials who say that they want to support you kind of turn their face to us because we're kind of ashamed that nobody wants to kind of look at.
Yeah, no, I look at someone like de Blasio. I mean, isn't he an ally in this? Shouldn't he be, the working man's champion out there something? Nothing?
Should have been, but honestly, I think the mayor's office is in one of the best positions. Do it. The organization that regulates the company, he had the power to put a lot of the practices that they found out, they did find violations on them. I mean, this stuff should have been investigated early, but it dragged out so long before this was even, if there was a real earnest to have something done about this, we believe that it could have been done, and it could have been done a lot sooner. The longer it took, the more leverage we lost.
Yeah, and the more people then go find other jobs and move away, and then the attention goes away. You know, because I remember there was a very successful strike down in the markets down in New York, and AOC came down. They had a big to do. Any message from AOC?
Not much. We did have and reach out to her, and we asked any of the elected officials that are going on Spectrum at a minimum to try to wear a button of support to say that, let people know we're still on strike and that you support the strike. We've been able to at least get her to do that. But as far as speaking out about our strike specifically, that is still going on, it's still happening, parts of her district, we have not been able to get much response on many people from that.
So let me ask you the crazy question then, because Spectrum is an extraordinarily profitable company. They're making huge amounts of money. They got a CEO lining his pockets. What was it that you were asking for? How much were you asking for? How egregious were your requests and demands that this is what they do? Or is it just your sheer existence?
We were only asking for the big fat, can we please keep what we already have?
That's it?
That was it. That was what we actually, that was the furthest we got in negotiations. How about we can keep what we already have and let's keep working?
Yeah. And they wouldn't let you work under the old contract and continue down that road either.
There was no working. Their intention from sitting down at a bargaining table, period, was to try to put us out. We saw that from the very beginning, just from their stance and what you would call negotiations. During the negotiations, one of the main negotiators from the company sat down at the table and told us he promises on his mother's grave we will never get back our retirement and medical benefits. So at that point, what more can you do?
No, that's horrible. But here again, and I go back to the Trump administration. The Trump administration, through the NLRB, gave corporate America all of their wet dream list, all of the things they could have ever wanted, and one of them being exactly what you went through. Making it much more difficult to bring unfair labor practices, making it easier for people to attempt decertification votes. In fact, after you struck, in the last year and a half of the Trump term, they actually went to a policy that, 90 days before the expiration of a contract, they can then seek a decertification vote and make the union prove that they have majority support. And then basically set the contract aside. So the decisions that they were making were stacking the deck against you from day one. Mm-hmm. So the question I have from you now is, where do you see this going from here? I mean, Joe Biden, it's going to be a while before Biden gets to replace the people on the National Labor Relations Board who will hopefully make better decisions. How do you see this playing out? Are you going to be out there another year, another 4 years?
Well, I mean, one of the good things is this year there's going to be a lot of turnover in the elected officials for this city. We believe that they could have been done more from the very beginning to try to push this. It starts with the mayor's office, and that's changing over. Spectrum's franchise was up in 2020. The only reason it hasn't been set up for renewal yet because of a court case that's happening somewhere else with the city. So we're hoping that that's one of the pressure points that they put on is to tell them that we're not renewing your franchise for the bad and unfair labor practices you've done in the city. They've had multiple violations besides our strike that would allow them to do that without a problem. And then one of the other big things we're pushing for is to try to have a public option where we came together, the employees who built out the city over the past 40 years, and we're trying to join with the public to start a company that can provide the cable service that we built out instead of having Spectrum do it and gobble up the profits from the city.
No, that's to me that sounds like one of the better options. Get away from these giant conglomerates and these greed hounds, and do it for ourselves. And in the process, provide good family-sustaining wage jobs. Let me ask you about you guys who have been on the line this whole time. This is a Herculean leap. 4 years. I've been on strike. It was only a couple of weeks long, and I remember people were basically starving at that point. I can't imagine not having a job for 4 years and for being committed to this for this long. How have you stayed involved in it?
I think it's every time I get a call from somebody who's stands beside me, been out for 4 years, and they've just lost something else, and they still refuse to go back to try to keep a fight going. So when I hear someone else beside me that's doing the same fight that I have, it gives me a little more strength to keep going. And then the fact that that somebody came into your city and basically kicked you out of a spot that is rightfully belongs to the workers, and then no one's having them answer for it. Somebody has to take a fight forward to make sure that they can answer for what happens and what happened in one way or another. And I don't know, that I think that's what keeps most of us pushing right now.
But again, for me, this tragedy here is too much corporate power, a National Labor Relations Board that's bought and paid for by corporate interest, and labor laws that are so antiquated, ossificated, and broken that we need massive reform. And I'm hoping that this administration, the Biden administration, does move forward on the PRO Act, does reform our labor board, and we start moving towards a more worker-centric, more worker-focused board, so that people like you never have to go through this. Because it doesn't sound to me like you were asking for anything too outrageous. You just, hey, we'd like to keep what we've got, please. That doesn't seem outrageous to me.
Right. And then even before some of the moves that Biden's made with the administration, I see with the NLRB, hopefully it's going to be helpful, because some of our cases are still sitting with them right now. But honestly, my hope is that some of the local officials who can have more of an immediate act step up and start to support us and actually show, acknowledge that we're still out on strike. Speak on the news and say that there's still a strike that's going on. Let people know that Spectrum Cable, who's broadcasting and billboarding their name everywhere, is a bad actor in the city, and not just try to hide the fact that this is something that's shameful, a bad mark on the city for unions.
Last line of questioning I've got for you. Our listeners are going to want to help. Is there a way for people to help? Is there a way to help push the message to promote this? Are you doing social media campaigns? I know you guys have got a website, unplugspectrum.com. I hope folks will take a look at that. That's unplugspectrum.com. What's the request for union members and workers to help out?
One thing is, yes, to go to unplugspectrum.com, sign up for our option for public-owned cable. One of the big things that we're pushing right now, and you'll see something come about it soon, is us trying to push, and we actually have a foot in the standing to try to make that a reality, where we can be able to provide service to the people and have the public have ownership in that system, and us as well. So to try to stay on the lookout for that, stay on unplugspectrum.com, and I guess push every local official can to make sure that this story does not go forgotten.
Yeah, because I got to tell you, and I'm sorry, Troy, it fell off my radar. It's one of those things where early on I reached out, and it was across my timeline, and sadly, and maybe this is a fault of the movement as a whole, but this is the longest strike going on in the country. You would think that this would get some attention.
Yep, you would think so. Certain people have supported us. Like, we've reached out to some high profile names like Sarah Nelson. She's always reached out and supported us. Different people like Zephyr Teachout. Some of the elected officials for the city, Roy Lansman, Barry Gordincic, even Richie. A lot of people have helped, but some of the main people who should have helped are definitely silent.
Well, so the more we talk about it, the more hopefully it'll get some attention and we can get some action. But Troy, I appreciate the time. If there's anything I can do, let me know. I'm in this with you one day longer, brother.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your help. And thank you very much again for letting me have an opportunity to speak on the show.
Good stuff. I wish you the best. Troy Walcott. I don't know how this guy's done this, or any of these guys. If you just go to unplugspectrum.com, find out a way you can help out. This is ludicrous. But more important, maybe contact the Biden administration. Say, we can get something done. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day that ground was broken on what would become one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. At least 476 and possibly more than 700 men died from a disease. The project was called the Hawks Nest Tunnel. It was part of a hydroelectric project by the company Union Carbide. The aim was to harness the energy of the New River in West Virginia to power a metals plant. Workers cut through 3 miles of solid rock under the Gauley Mountain to divert water for the project. Most of the workers were black men recruited from the South. Much of the rock they were cutting through had a very high silica content. Despite the fact that the dangers of silica dust were well known, the company ignored standard safety practices. It is safer to drill through high silica content using a wet drill method, which cuts down on the dust. The project manager opted to use dry drilling to save time on the project. They also failed to provide the needed ventilation or respirators for the workers. Men desperate for work during the Great Depression flocked to the project. In all, nearly 5,000 men labored on the tunnel. A congressional subcommittee that investigated the disaster found that the whole driving of the tunnel was begun, continued, and completed with grave and inhumane disregard of all consideration for the health, lives, and future of the employees. For many, work on the Hawks Tunnel was a death sentence. People with silicosis die a slow, agonizing, suffocating death. The companies involved in the project faced litigation, but in the end, they only paid out $200,000 in damages. Some that were impacted received as little as $30 for their lives.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I got to tell you, I can't imagine how you stay on strike for 4 years and you stay committed to it like that. Good on them. I mean, that's courage. I got to imagine at that point it's a quest, to just last that one day longer. And look, if you can check out unplugspectrum.com, that'd be helpful. Sign up for their updates. Incredible. And this is, again, I call out to someone like AOC who has the power to draw attention to stuff like this. Use that platform, help these people, help these workers. This is the thing that gets me. They didn't want anything. They wanted nothing. They wanted just to keep what they had. And this is, again, I come back to, this isn't unusual. What is unusual is that these guys and these women, these workers have stuck it out. They have fought and fought and fought. I go back to, Bill Clinton. I voted for Bill Clinton for one reason. He promised to pass a strike replacement bill. These workers are being replaced. And the laws aren't on their side to help keep them employed. It's quite remarkable what we've allowed to happen in this country. And then to have somebody despicable who would move from the management side to the worker side and then try a decertification vote. That's exactly what the Pinkertons of old would do. That's exactly what happened in the 1880s and 1890s in company towns. And to have that happen today, angering. Simply angering. And this is where I come back to. I have some hope that Joe Biden is going to be helpful. That firing Peter Robb on day one as general counsel at the NLRB, to me, was an enormous step in the right direction. Getting a more worker-friendly NLRB. And look, I don't want people who are swung one side or the other. I want people who are going to interpret the law the way it was meant, being fair and judicious. And I know that's not possible today, especially when you've got a court like and a board like you have now, who has just been at the beck and call of corporate interests and really made some horrible decisions. There's got to be some bit of balance. And this is where we need the PRO Act immediately. We need major labor law reform. We need to have a mechanism in place that settles these strikes, that settles lockouts, that gets people to the bargaining table where they actually have to bargain in good faith, not come with one bad offer and then come back with a worse one. Rough times. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you're going. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, unplugspectrum.com. Make sure you check that out. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.